that there's a race for president of the United States. The current sitting president is running for re-election. 3.5 months from the election, he decides not to run. The sitting vice president then takes the mantle, running against a former president of the United States who had been running for 10 years with 107 days.
People didn't used to get sick of the candidates because you barely ever saw them unless you happened to be standing at the back end of a train. But now we never stop seeing them. The winner in modern elections comes down to who we're less tired of.
Bill Maher just tore into Kamala Harris with fireworks-level intensity, and it was pure comedy gold. He slammed her for being chaotic and out of touch, arguing she still hasn't connected with her audience. Maher's takedown was sharp, explosive, and absolutely hilarious. You won't want to miss it.
When Joe Biden was still hanging on to be the candidate, many of the pundits said that to switch him out this late would cause chaos. Yeah, that was never my position. And indeed, what happened was Kamala Harris said, "Oh, look, I guess it's my turn." And the next day, a grateful nation handed her $500 million. The only reason we stay stuck in permanent campaign mode is money. It's estimated this year that $16 billion will be spent on political ads. It's time we admit that the endless campaign exists only to enrich advertisers, political consultants, and what's left of the news media.
The DNC never fully assessed the risks before settling on Kamala Harris as the 2024 nominee. The issues started well before her selection. Joe Biden declined to step aside early, and the DNC continued to support his run until his disastrous debate performance forced a last-minute scramble. When Harris was moved in as the replacement, party leaders tried to offset the turmoil by giving her an enormous war chest, hoping money alone would steady the campaign. But it barely made a difference. The influx of funding didn't fix the messaging problems, didn't ease voter concerns, and certainly didn't rebuild trust. In the end, it came across as a rushed gamble that never had a clear path to holding on to power.
And the fact that we're just getting to know Kamala isn't bad. It's great. Great for her, great for the country. People didn't used to get sick of the candidates because you barely ever saw them unless you happened to be standing at the back end of a train. But now we never stop seeing them. The winner in modern elections comes down to who we're less tired of. They're just constantly on us. TV, radio, the mail, on our phones, texting. Hey, Bill, Tim Walz here. You up? They're everywhere all the time. Jesus Christ, fuck off. Let mommy put her purse down.
Here, Maher is pushing back against Kamala Harris defenders, who argue that voters simply didn't have enough time to get to know her, because her campaign was relatively short. But Maher isn't buying it, and based on the facts presented in the commentary, there's not much reason anyone else should either. Harris had nearly $500 million at her disposal, a massive budget by any standard. She poured huge sums into nonstop ads, celebrity endorsements, and tightly managed appearances. A-list stars with massive followings blasted her image and slogans across their feeds, saturating social media. Visibility wasn't the issue. If anything, it was overexposure. Voters saw plenty of Kamala, her message, her branding, her symbolism. The problem wasn't that people didn't get to know her. As Maher suggests, the real takeaway is that voters may have grown tired of seeing her well before Election Day arrived.
Vice President Harris, in her new book, said it was, quote, recklessness for former President Biden's allies to leave the decision about running for re-election up to him and his family. Do you agree with her? Was it recklessness?
Look, I wasn't there, Kristen, on this, and I think the president, again, got us through COVID, ushered us through, brought the economy back from the edge. I think there's questions about this, and I want to be very clear on me talking about the MRI. Ageism is a real thing. Ableism is a real thing that we need to be careful of with people. And I think Donald Trump made a cottage industry out of attacking Joe Biden's competency, and it seemed like that got reported a lot.
Here we go with the dodging again. The question was simple, yet Tim Walz still managed to sidestep it like he was trying out for a political talent show. Kamala Harris had already made her stance clear. She blamed Joe Biden inner circle for leaving the decision to remain in the race entirely in Biden's hands and essentially, in his family hands. In her view, they should have stepped in sooner, taken responsibility, and spared the party the chaos that followed. In other words, she's pointing to Biden's lateness and indecision as a major factor in her eventual loss. But instead of addressing that point, Tim Walz tries to redirect the blame toward Donald Trump, as if Trump somehow engineered the Democratic Party internal missteps. It's quite the deflection and a convenient way to avoid acknowledging that the dysfunction originated inside the House.
Now, whether that decision should have been made sooner, history will determine that. What I do know is that going forward, we need somebody in office who's actually going to tackle the things Americans need, whether it's about costs or whether it's about our national security needs and honoring those with our allies. And I think maybe there's a lesson to be learned from what happened with President Biden. If that's the case, it should certainly be applied right now to this president who is putting Americans at risk, is reckless, and is not doing what he's asked to do.
And here we go again with the familiar anti-Trump fixation. For whatever reason, some people just can't keep Trump out of the conversation, even when the topic has nothing to do with him. But did you catch the subtle slip in Tim Walz's remarks while taking his routine swipe at Trump? He also seemed to nudge Joe Biden under the bus quietly, but unmistakably. When Walz said there was a lesson to be learned from Biden, it didn't sound like praise. It sounded like a hint that Biden mishandled the transition and probably should have stepped aside much earlier. It an indirect nod to the growing Democratic argument that Biden's hesitation and slow decision-making helped fuel the party collapse. So even as Walz tried to distract with yet another Trump reference, he inadvertently reinforced the very criticism Harris and others have been making all along.
Former Vice President Kamala Harris has left the door open to potentially run for office again. Do you still think she's the strongest person to run for president in 2028?
Well, I'm glad she's out there, and I'm glad a whole lot of other people are out there, because I think Donald Trump sucks up so much oxygen. We need to have the Democratic Party out on the field, the broad, inclusive Democratic Party, talking about making life more affordable, talking about protecting freedoms, and I think Kamala Harris does a wonderful job with that. If she chooses to run, that betters all of us. We will have the process. We'll go through. I'm sure there'll be a lot of folks throw their hat into the ring, but that's good, and we need to make sure that we're providing the alternative that America's asking for.
So now it's pretty clear why Kamala Harris picked Tim Walz as her running mate. Much like Harris, he's skilled at sidestepping direct questions as if giving a straight answer were some kind of political hazard. When asked a simple yes or no question about whether he believes Harris would be a strong candidate in 2028, he couldn't bring himself to give a direct response, and that hesitation says a lot. It suggests one of two things: either he no longer sees Harris as a viable future nominee, or he keeping his options open for whichever figure the party elevates next. Personally, I lean toward the former. Harris' 2024 performance hurt her credibility, and many within the Democratic establishment have already hinted she'd be a weak contender in 2028. Walz likely knows this as well. His dodge wasn't just political caution, it was a quiet acknowledgement that the party may already be looking beyond Harris, even if no one is ready to say it publicly.
And I think she had a message last year that I'm proud of. I think, did it break through enough? Obviously not, but it's still a message that works, making sure that America is affordable for all, people feel included, and we tackle the toughest problems.
And that's exactly the point Maher has been making from the start. Most Americans struggled to connect with Kamala Harris' message because it never really spoke to their day-to-day realities. It wasn't a matter of voters lacking interest or failing to give her a fair shot. She had plenty of chances. Interviews, rallies, major speeches, national spotlights, the stage was hers again and again. But instead of offering clear, direct arguments, Harris often drifted into long stretches of vague phrasing and tangled logic that left people more puzzled than informed. Viewers weren't walking away motivated, they were walking away trying to figure out what she had just said. Maher critique targets something deeper. Communication isn't just talking, it's making people feel understood. Harris frequently came across as detached, overly scripted, or stuck in circles of lofty-sounding rhetoric that ultimately didn't say much at all. Many Americans simply couldn't follow her explanations, and eventually, they stopped trying. When a politician's message turns into a riddle, voters check out. Maher's point wasn't just comedic exaggeration, it captured a widespread frustration Harris was never able to overcome.
What was the primary reason, do you think, that you lost?
There are many factors, I think, that played into the outcome of that election. But I think probably one of the biggest in my mind is we just didn't have enough time.
You didn't have enough
time. We didn't have enough time.
Oh, yeah. Well, you didn't.
And, one of the reasons I wrote the book is this is unprecedented. Think about this.
Yeah.
That there's a race for president of the United States. The current sitting president is running for re-election. 3.5 months from the election, he decides not to run. The sitting vice president then takes the mantle, running against a former president of the United States who had been running for 10 years with 107 days.
At this point, critics argue it clear that Kamala Harris often shifts her messaging in ways meant to steady her campaign narrative. Her latest claim that Donald Trump had an inherent advantage simply because he was a former president falls apart the moment her own situation is considered. She was the sitting vice president while running. If previous status supposedly grants a built-in political edge, then she had one as well, arguably an even stronger one. What makes her argument even more ironic, critics say, is what she leaves out about the years she and the Biden administration were in office. They argue that Democrats spent considerable time attacking Trump politically, and that the legal battles surrounding him frequently influenced the election atmosphere. In their view, he was mocked, dismissed as unfit, portrayed as a threat, and constantly tied to scandals that dominated the news cycle. So for Harris to now suggest that Trump strolled into the race with some unfair advantage comes off, to her critics, as disingenuous. To them, it's yet another example of her shifting blame instead of taking responsibility for her own failed campaign strategy.
Another piece of what is unprecedented and a bit historical about that race, it is the closest presidential race in the 21st century in terms of the outcome.
Wow. Yeah.
The closest.
Say that again, because he likes to say over and over again he's got a mandate.
And that's part of why I wrote this book, because history will talk about this race. It is part of American history. And it was important to me that when history is written, that my voice be present about what that experience is.
Sometimes I can't help but wonder what the audience hears before they applaud Kamala Harris, because she rarely delivered anything that felt truly grounded. But that beside the point. For many observers, the reason they believe Trump gained what they view as a mandate in 2024 has less to do with speeches and more to do with broader political trends. He performed strongly across key states, and turnout patterns suggested that dissatisfaction with the economy from inflation to cost of living pressures played a major role in shaping voter behavior. Analysts also noted shifts in certain demographic groups and an uptick in voters who had grown frustrated with the direction of the country. For many Americans, the result wasn't just about supporting Trump, it was a response to rising prices, uncertainty, and general frustration with the party in power. In that sense, his performance was seen by some as a rejection of the status quo. Meanwhile, Harris struggled to connect, communicate, or convince undecided voters. No amount of applause or celebrity backing could compensate for a message critics viewed as vague, a delivery they found confusing, or a campaign they felt lacked focus. Trump, on the other hand, capitalized on voter frustration and shifting coalitions to build momentum. To many, the contrast between clarity and confusion as between confidence and campaign missteps shaped the final outcome more than anything else. And with that, we've reached the end of today's video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more content like this.